The alien queen read a 20-year-old love letter. She couldn't believe who wrote it. The archive beneath Herath Prime's eastern palace had a smell that never changed, no matter the century. Dust, cold mineral air, and the faint ozone tang of light crystal shelving that hummed at a frequency, just low enough to be felt in the teeth rather than heard. Queen Camila had always found the smell oddly comforting, the way some people found comfort in old libraries or empty churches, and she told herself that was the only reason she'd agreed to come down here personally, instead of sending an aide to deal with what was, by every account she'd been given, a budgetary formality. "You said this would take 10 minutes, she said, not quite a complaint, more a statement of fact she expected someone to refute. "It will take 10 minutes, said Pell, who was walking a half-step behind her with a data slate tucked under one arm like a schoolbook. "The 10 minutes simply have not started yet, because we haven't found the room. You work here. I work near here. There's a difference. The archive has 41 sublevels, and at least 3 of them were sealed during a budget dispute in the reign of your grandmother, and never properly reopened, which means the numbering system skips like a scratched record, and I genuinely believe whoever designed the signage hated future generations on a personal level." Camilla's ears, long and faintly tapered in the way of her people, gave the smallest involuntary flick, amusement, not irritation, though the two often looked alike on her. "You're saying we're lost." "I'm saying we're *oriented*. Lost implies panic. I am calm. You're holding the slate upside down." Pell looked down, said a word in Herathi that the translation implants would have politely refused to render into common, and rotated the slate with the brisk dignity of someone who had absolutely meant to do that. They found sublevel 19 eventually, behind a door that required Camilla's seal ring, pressed flat against a reader that took an embarrassingly long 3 seconds to recognize royal biometrics. It had presumably been calibrated to recognize instantly, and stepped into a long, low room lined floor to ceiling with storage crystals in their resting cradles, each one glowing the dim amber of inactive data rather than the brighter gold of something being read. A young man was waiting for them near a worktable cluttered with paper, actual paper, the old kind, brittle and yellowed at the edges, looking like someone who had been rehearsing an apology in his head for the last 20 minutes and had not yet landed on a version he liked. "Your Majesty." He bowed, slightly too low, slightly too fast, the bow of a man whose body had panicked before his mind had finished deciding to be nervous. "I'm Torin. I work well. I'm one of the junior archivists assigned to the digitization project. The trade correspondence one, the very boring one." "I was told there was a budgetary matter," Camila said. There was. I mean, technically the budget question is still open. But that's not—" Torin stopped, visibly reorganized his thoughts, and tried again with the air of a man stepping carefully over something he suspected might be a landmine. "While I was cataloging one of the older folders, agricultural tariff renewals, from about 20 years back, genuinely the dullest material in this entire sublevel, I want to stress that, because I think it matters for why no one noticed sooner. I found a document that didn't match the rest." "Wrong fiscal year?" Pell asked, already looking faintly more interested in this than in budgets. "Wrong everything." Torin picked up a single sheet from the table with the careful, two-handed grip of someone handling something that might disintegrate or detonate or both. "It's not a trade document. I don't think it's a state document at all. I think someone filed it here on purpose, 20 years ago, specifically because they didn't want anyone to find it." Camila held out her hand, and after a half-second of hesitation that suggested Torin was now fully aware he might be handing the Queen a piece of his own career, he gave it to her. The paper was old in the way only paper got old, soft at the corners. The ink faded unevenly across the page like the humidity control in this sublevel had spent 2 decades arguing with itself about what its job actually was. Camila unfolded it without much expectation. She had, in 20-some years of rule, been handed enough strange archival flotsam that her instinct was mild curiosity rather than alarm, the same instinct she might apply to a oddly shaped vegetable or a clock that ran backward, and began to read with the kind of distracted attention a person gives something they assume will resolve into nothing. The handwriting was unfamiliar, careful, slightly too formal in a way that struck her, a few lines in, as the particular formality of someone writing in a language that was not their first, choosing each word the way a person crosses a frozen lake, testing each step before committing weight to it. Herathi grammar, attempted with real effort and only partial success. Verb tenses occasionally folded into each other in ways no native speaker would do. A small charming wrongness that she found herself smiling at before she'd even registered what the sentences were actually saying. Then she registered what the sentences were actually saying, and the smile went somewhere else. "Pell," she said, and her own voice sounded strange to her, slightly too even. "Read this." Pell took the page, scanned it with the quick efficiency of someone used to reading documents for a living, and her eyebrows did something complicated. "Well, that's not a tariff renewal." "No." "That's," Pell read further, and her expression shifted from professional neutrality into something closer to delighted scandal. The look of a woman who has just found out a piece of gossip is going to be *good. "Camila, this is a love letter." "I noticed. I mean it's a proper *1. Look at this line. He's comparing. Is he comparing your laugh to weather patterns? Who taught this man to write romance? A meteorologist." "Pell." "I'm just saying. As someone who has read every diplomatic cable this kingdom has produced in the last decade, this is by far the most interesting paragraph structure I've encountered. And also I think whoever wrote this should be retroactively docked points on his composition exam, because verb agreement is not a suggestion." "Pell." Camilla's tone finally cut through, not sharp, but enough, and Pell looked up, and whatever she saw in the Queen's face was enough to make even her quiet for a second, which Torin would later describe to his colleagues as the single rarest event he had personally witnessed in his entire archival career. Because Camilla had reached the part of the letter where formal phrasing gave way to something plainer, something that didn't sound like it was trying to cross a frozen lake anymore, something that sounded instead like a man who had stopped being careful, because he'd already decided none of it would ever matter, none of it would ever be read, none of it would ever need to survive contact with the person it was about. And it was that plainness, more than anything ornate that came before it, that made the shock arrive slow and total, like cold water rising past her knees before she'd even registered stepping into the lake at all. 20 years, filed wrong on purpose in a folder about grain tariffs 20 years ago. She had not yet found the name at the bottom of the page. She was almost afraid to look for it, the way a person delays opening a door they already suspect leads somewhere they don't want to stand. "Torin," she said carefully, not looking up. "Who else has seen this?" "No one, Majesty. I came straight to the duty office. I didn't think it was my place to read past the first paragraph, once I realized what it was." "Good instinct." She finally let her eyes drop to the signature, small, slightly smudged, written by a hand that had clearly hesitated before committing to putting a name to all of it. The room was very quiet. Even the light crystals seemed to hum a little softer. "Pell," Camilla said, and her voice had gone strange again, but in a different direction now. "Do you remember a human attaché, quiet man, served less than a year, would have been here about 20 years back?" Pell blinked. "There were dozens of. Named Daniel." Pell did not answer right away, which was, in itself, unusual enough that Camilla finally looked up from the letter to study her aide's face properly. Pell had the particular stillness of someone running a search through a very old, very dusty mental archive of her own. Lips slightly parted, eyes unfocused in the way that meant she was looking at something 20 years back rather than at the room they stood in. Daniel, Pell repeated slowly, testing the name like she was checking whether it would hold weight. Human, quiet. She stopped, frowned, started again. There was a Daniel, yes, but Camila. There were also a Daniel with a different surname, and a Daniel who insisted on the extra letter for reasons no one ever got out of him. And I have a vague memory of a fourth one who turned out to be a translation glitch and didn't actually exist. That's reassuring. I'm being thorough. You want thorough or you want fast, pick one. I am one woman with one liver and this room is doing something unpleasant to both. Torin, who had been standing very still near the work table, with the expression of a man who had wandered into the middle of a play after missing the first act, and was trying to work out whether he was allowed to leave, cleared his throat. There's a personnel archive for diplomatic staff. It's on this sublevel, technically, though the indexing is, he hesitated, choosing his words with the caution of someone who had clearly complained about this indexing system to several people already, and wasn't sure if complaining to the Queen was a promotion or a demotion. It's not great. Define not great, Camila said. It was digitized by committee. Pell made a small sound that in any other context might have been mistaken for pain. Oh no. Yeah, a committee did the indexing. Several committees. Sequentially. Each one disagreed with the last one's naming convention, and instead of fixing it they just layered a new system on top. There are files in there labeled by posting year, by department, by a 6-month period where someone insisted on alphabetizing by home planet, and at least one stretch that appears to be organized by the archivist's personal opinion of how interesting the person was. That last one is somehow the most useful, Pell said, already moving toward the terminal built into the worktable's edge, the old kind with actual physical keys that clicked under her fingers with a satisfying, slightly anachronistic sound. Camila, sit down. This is going to take a minute, and I refuse to let you stand there radiating tragic monarch energy at me while I work. It's putting me off my typing. I don't radiate. You absolutely radiate. You've got the look. The one from the Unification Anniversary portrait, where the painter clearly told you to look wise and you looked constipated instead, and everyone was too polite to ask for a second sitting. Camila opened her mouth to object, found she didn't actually have an objection ready, and sat down on the worktable's single rickety stool instead, the letter still held with unconscious care between 2 fingers, like something that might evaporate if she gripped it the way she normally gripped paperwork. Which was to say, with the casual disrespect of someone who signed 40 documents before breakfast. The terminal's screen flickered to life with the particular reluctant glow of old Herathi tech that had been kept running far past its intended service life out of sheer institutional stubbornness. And Pell began typing search terms with the rapid, irritated efficiency of a woman who had clearly done battle with this exact system before, and lost more than once. Okay, human attachés, 21 years back to 19 years back, just to give us a margin. A pause. The screen filled with a list that immediately scrolled past the edges of the display, forcing Pell to swear quietly and adjust a filter. There's O for star's sake. There's *11 Daniels. 11. Apparently it was a popular name on Earth that decade. I don't know what was happening down there, possibly a very influential children's show, but 11 Daniels came through this kingdom's diplomatic postings in a 3-year window, and I want it on record that I find this deeply unhelpful of an entire planet. Torin, emboldened slightly by the fact that no one had told him to leave yet, leaned over to look at the screen. Some of these can probably be ruled out fast, though. The letter mentioned Herathi composition errors, right? So whoever wrote it was actively trying to learn the language, which means he was probably here long enough to attempt lessons, not just passing through for a single summit. Camila glanced at him with something between surprise and approval. That's good thinking. I read a lot of personnel files for a living, Majesty. You start noticing patterns. Also, I would just like to say, completely separately, That 11 men with the same first name showing up to one diplomatic posting in 3 years sounds like the start of a very strange holiday on Earth. And I have several questions about Daniel as a cultural phenomenon that nobody here can answer. Pell snorted, which dissolved any remaining formality in the room rather effectively, and began cross-referencing duration of posting against the 11 names, narrowing them down with small, satisfied sounds each time one fell away. Too short a posting, wrong department. One who, according to the file, had been recalled early after what the record dryly described only as an incident involving the ambassador's prize hounds, which Pell insisted they were not allowed to move on from without further explanation, and which Camila, despite everything, found herself almost laughing at. Wait, Pell's fingers stopped. Here, Daniel, no middle initial listed, posted as a junior attaché, served, she squinted, 10 months, attached to the trade delegation. Records say he requested early rotation home, no disciplinary flags, no notable incidents. A beat. And gloriously, here is his entire performance review, in full, copied verbatim, because apparently brevity was someone's whole personality back then. She cleared her throat theatrically. Adequate, unobtrusive, brought good bread. There was a short, stunned silence. That's the whole review, Pell confirmed, delighted. 3 words and a baked good. I have written longer notes about a lunch order. Camila, despite herself, despite the letter still sitting in her hand like a small, unexploded thing, laughed. A real laugh, short and surprised out of her. The kind that made Torin visibly relax for the first time since she'd walked into the room. Bread, apparently very good bread, the review specifies. 20 years and the historical record's only opinion of him is that he was quiet and brought baked goods to a trade summit. Honestly, Pell tapped the screen. That tracks with the letter. A man who writes a love letter that careful, that quiet, then never says a word and just leaves bread around as a substitute for confessing his feelings. That's not a stretch, Camila. That's a asterisk type. I don't remember him. You wouldn't. Look, Pell pulled up an interaction log, the kind every formal diplomatic encounter generated automatically through the palace's old proximity and protocol sensors, logging duration and presence the way Herathi court tradition had insisted on for centuries, originally for security reasons and now mostly preserved out of bureaucratic inertia. She scanned it and her eyebrows climbed slowly upward. Camila, you and this man were in the same room total across his entire 10-month posting for 11 minutes. 11 minutes. 11 minutes across, Pell checked. 4 separate occasions, one of which appears to have been a receiving line where the log records his presence as 90 seconds, which I am almost certain is the time it takes to walk past someone and say absolutely nothing. Camila looked down at the letter again, at the careful, hesitant Herathi grammar, at the plain, unguarded ache underneath it, and felt something in her chest do a slow, strange turn, not grief exactly, not yet, but the dizzy vertigo of trying to balance an entire unspoken devotion on top of 11 minutes and a loaf of bread, and finding, against all reasonable expectation, that it held. 11 minutes, she said again, quieter this time, and Pell, for once, had nothing clever to say back. It was Pell who eventually broke the quiet, because Pell was constitutionally incapable of leaving a quiet alone for longer than 30 seconds if she suspected it was the sentimental kind. Okay, she said, straightening up from the terminal and cracking her knuckles with the air of a woman about to perform surgery. We have a name, a posting, a deeply unimpressive performance review, and 11 minutes of recorded proximity. I feel like the professional thing to do here is find out what happened to him afterward, and the asterisk personal thing to do is for you to stop holding that letter like it's going to bite you, Camila. It's paper. It's not going to retroactively propose. I'm not holding it like anything. You're holding it the way I hold a tax form I haven't read yet, but already suspect is bad news. Camila set it down on the work table with more deliberate care than the gesture strictly required, which rather proved Pell's point, though neither of them said so out loud. Fine, find out what happened to him. That, Pell said, turning back to the terminal, is going to be its own special kind of nightmare, because the personnel archive only tracks people while they're asterisk employed by the kingdom. The second he rotated home, he became Earth's problem, and Earth's record-keeping does not talk to Herathi systems without an act of diplomatic God. You're saying it's impossible. I'm saying it's going to take more than 10 minutes, which at this point feels like the unofficial motto of this entire sublevel. Pell pulled up something that looked, even from across the room, deeply unpromising. A tangled directory structure with branches nested so many layers deep that the screen had to scroll sideways to show all of it, labeled in a mix of Herathi script and what Camila recognized, with weary familiarity, as several different and mutually incompatible versions of common. This is the Intersystem Personnel Handoff Registry. It exists because 200 years ago someone decided Herath Prime needed a way to track foreign diplomatic staff after they left, presumably for security reasons. And then several generations of administrators added features to it until it became this. I would describe the system architecture as held together by spite and outdated firmware, and I want it on record that I am not exaggerating for comic effect. I have genuinely said this exact sentence to 3 separate IT officers. Torin, who had drifted closer again with the helpless curiosity of someone watching a slow-motion disaster he found fascinating rather than alarming, leaned in. I've used this, a little, for unrelated cataloging. It has moods. It has moods, Pell agreed grimly, typing. Sometimes it just won't return results for an hour and there's no error message. It just sits there. It's sulking. That's what we call it, yes. Camila, watching the two of them commiserate over the registry, with the easy camaraderie of people bonded by shared bureaucratic suffering, found herself almost smiling again despite the strange hollow feeling still sitting low in her chest. There was something steadying about it. About the absurdity of a love letter that had waited 20 years in a folder about grain tariffs only to be chased down, in the end, through a database with moods. The registry, true to its reputation, took its time. Pell muttered at it. At one point she threatened it in Herathi with what Camila was fairly sure was a decommissioning order she had no actual authority to issue, and the screen, perhaps cowed, perhaps coincidentally, finally produced a result. There, Pell sat back. Daniel, returned to Earth, processed out of diplomatic service 11 months after his posting ended, which tracks. After that the registry loses him, because, again, not our jurisdiction, but there's a courtesy flag here, a forwarding note left by the consular office, the kind they leave when someone asks for their mail to be redirected. It's old, it's probably stale, but it's something. What does it say? It says he gave a forwarding address in a town I have never heard of, on a continent I'm only 60% sure I'm pronouncing right, and that the listed occupation at time of departure was attaché, trade division, obviously. But there's a secondary note here, added later, from what looks like a routine immigration update a few years after that. Pell squinted, occupation baker. The word landed in the quiet room with an odd, gentle thud, not dramatic so much as deeply, almost comically fitting, and Camila let out a breath that was half a laugh before she could stop it. Bread, she said. Bread, Pell confirmed. He went home and became a baker. I want to be very clear that I find this the single most narratively satisfying piece of information we have uncovered today, more satisfying honestly than the letter itself. Because the letter tells us he loved you and said nothing. And this tells us that afterward he went home and dedicated his entire life to a craft that requires patience, precision, and the quiet acceptance that most of your work will be consumed by people who will never know your name. I don't know what that says about him. I think it says a lot. You're enjoying this. I am thriving, Camila. I haven't had material this good since the Harvest Festival incident. And you asterisk, no asterisk, I'm not allowed to talk about the Harvest Festival incident in front of Torin, because he's too junior for that level of palace gossip. I'm right here, Torin said mildly. You're seasoning, not an ingredient yet. Give it a few years. Camila picked the letter back up, turning it over once in her hands, looking again at the small smudged signature at the bottom, trying, and this time succeeding, a little to summon some flicker of memory to go with the name. A man at the edge of a receiving line. Someone who had stood slightly too far back, the way people did when they were trying not to be noticed and ended up, paradoxically, more noticeable for the effort. A correction, once, to a translator's mistranslated phrase during a trade negotiation, delivered so quietly that she remembered being mildly impressed, and then immediately forgetting who had said it. Because there had been 40 other things competing for her attention that day, and he had clearly intended to be one of the forgettable ones. And bread. She remembered bread, now that she let herself look for it. A long table at some summit or other, dense, dark, unfamiliar bread that someone had brought as what she'd assumed at the time was a minor diplomatic courtesy. The kind of small cultural gift attachés brought constantly, and that rarely meant anything beyond politeness. She had eaten 2 pieces of it and complimented whoever was nearest, and had never once thought to ask who had actually made it. He brought it himself, she said slowly. Didn't he? Not through the kitchens. He must have baked it himself and brought it to the summit. Pell, checking something on the screen, made a small triumphant sound. There's a note in the old hospitality log, yes. Self-provided gift item, attaché's own preparation, cleared by palace kitchen inspection beforehand. He made it. For you, presumably, though obviously he couldn't say that, so he made bread for an entire room and hoped you'd happen to eat some. That's the most roundabout declaration of feelings I have ever heard of. It's extremely human, Pell said, with the air of someone delivering a verdict after long study. I've read enough of their diplomatic cables to know they do this constantly. They build entire elaborate indirect gestures specifically so they never have to say the actual sentence out loud. It's like a national hobby. Camila looked down at the letter one more time, at 20 years of careful silence finally given language, and felt the strange vertigo from earlier settle slowly, into something steadier and sadder and oddly warm all at once. Not regret, not quite, but the dizzy, late arrival of understanding something that had been true the entire time without her ever once being asked to carry the weight of knowing it. Pell, she said, find out if the bakery's still open. Pell's fingers had barely left the keyboard before she winced. That, she said, is a question for a system that has even less interest in helping us than the last one. Worse than the registry. Different kind of worse. The registry was sulky. This is going to be slow because we're now asking a Herathi diplomatic terminal to query civilian commercial records on a planet we have a trade relationship with, but not, as it turns out, a particularly fast data sharing agreement with. It's going to have to bounce the request through at least 2 relay stations and an actual human bureaucrat somewhere, possibly several. And I want to set expectations now that find out if the bakery's still open might genuinely take longer than the 20 years it took for this letter to surface in the first place. That's an exaggeration. It's a mild exaggeration. Sit down anyway. Camila sat. Torin, perhaps sensing that the room had shifted into a different, longer kind of waiting than the brisk archival errand he'd originally signed up for, quietly produced 2 more stools from somewhere against the back wall, and a battered kettle that he plugged into a socket clearly never designed for it. The kind of socket meant for keeping ancient light crystals trickle-charged rather than boiling water, which made the kettle whine in protest the entire time it worked. You don't have to do that, Camila said. Majesty, with respect, I have been standing in a basement watching you discover a 20-year-old secret love letter for the better part of an hour, and I think the least the kingdom owes both of us is tea. But she didn't argue with that. The request crawled through whatever combination of relay stations and human bureaucrats Pell had warned about, and in the gap left behind, the conversation drifted, the way conversations did when people were waiting for something neither of them could speed up. Pell told a long, theatrical story about the Harvest Festival incident after all, eventually deciding Torin had been promoted from seasoning to ingredient somewhere in the last hour. And the story turned out to involve a runaway ceremonial goat, a visiting dignitary's wig, and a security protocol that had not been designed with goats in mind at all. And Camila laughed properly for the first time in what felt like days, the sound surprising even her. "You're better at this than you were 20 years ago," Pell said at one point, apropos of nothing, watching her over the rim of a chipped mug. "Laughing, I mean. You used to hold it in like it cost something." "I was younger." "You were stiffer. Ruling does that to people, I think, especially when you start young. You learn to keep your face very still because everyone's always watching it for a verdict. It's nice, watching you not do that for an hour." Camila considered the letter again, sitting now folded on the worktable between them, no longer a mystery so much as a small, settled fact. "I think I held my face still around him too. He probably thought I never noticed him at all. He probably preferred that, honestly. People who write letters like this, instead of saying it out loud, usually aren't hoping to be noticed. They're hoping to survive the feeling without it costing them anything. Saying nothing was the whole plan." "That's a sad plan." "It's a very human plan," Pell said. "I told you, national hobby." The terminal chimed, finally, with the particular flat, unceremonious tone Herathi systems used for everything from a security breach to a successfully reheated meal, utterly indifferent to the emotional weight of whatever information it was about to deliver. Pell turned Reed, and her expression did something complicated and soft that Camila hadn't seen on her in a long time. "It's still open," Pell said. "Small operation. Family business now, by the look of the listing. There's a second name attached to the ownership record, looks like a spouse, and a note about it having been passed down once already, though the original founder is still listed as a consulting partner, which I think just means he shows up sometimes and tells everyone they're doing it wrong." "He's alive." "He's alive, Camila. Quiet life. Bakery. Apparently locally well regarded. There's a sentence here from some regional registry copied over that says, and I quote loosely, 'known for sourdough, unbothered by trends.'" Pell looked up. "I don't think there's a kinder epitaph a person could ask for, frankly, while they're still around to read it." Camila sat with that for a long moment, turning the letter over once more in her hands, and felt the shape of the last hour settle into something she could finally name properly. Not grief, not quite romance either, but a kind of late, gentle gratitude, the strange luck of being shown, 20 years after the fact, that she had once been loved carefully and completely by someone who had never asked for anything back, not even to be remembered. "I'm not going to write to him," she said. Pell didn't look surprised. No. He built an entire quiet life on the assumption that none of this would ever surface. He chose silence on purpose, twice, once when he wrote it, and once when he left it somewhere he must have known might never be found at all, but also might. "I think the kindest thing I can do with that is let the life he actually built stay exactly as undisturbed as he wanted his feelings to be. He has a bakery. He has someone he built it with. That's not a sad ending, Pell, whatever your sense of drama wants it to be. That's just an ending that already finished on its own, a long time before I ever found out about it. That's annoyingly mature of you. I had an hour to practice." Still, Pell set the data slate down with something almost like reverence. "For the record, I think he'd be relieved if he knew. Not that you found it. I think part of him probably hoped, in some small, useless corner of his heart, that you eventually would. But relieved that you read it and didn't feel like you owed the past anything. That's a rare kindness, Camila. Most people who find out they were loved like that feel obligated to do something about it. You're just letting it have been true, without needing it to also be unfinished." Camila looked at the letter once more. The faded ink, the careful Herathi grammar gone plain and human in its last lines. And for the first time since Torin had handed it to her, the strange tightness in her chest eased into something that felt almost like peace. "Torin," she said, "this gets filed properly, not under tariffs. Where Majesty." She thought about it for a moment, and something in her, the part of her that had spent the last hour rediscovering, in small increments, how to hold her face less still, decided the answer should be a little less solemn than the moment technically deserved. "Personal correspondence," she said. "Subcategory bread." Pell made a sound that was somewhere between a laugh and a small, undignified snort. And even Torin, writing the label with great and careful seriousness onto a fresh storage crystal, was visibly fighting a smile. "For diplomatic continuity," Pell added, deadpan, sliding the data slate aside, "I do think the kingdom should send a delegation to that bakery eventually. Strictly for relations. Strictly professional. I hear the sourdough is unbothered by trends." "Pell, I'm only saying I've already half-written the trip request." Camila didn't confirm or deny that she'd noticed, 20 minutes earlier, exactly which town the forwarding address had named, or that some quiet, unhurried part of her had already decided she might someday find a reason to be in that part of the world. For now it was enough to set the letter down, finally, without holding it like something fragile, and to let the room's odd, ordinary little kettle and the bad lighting and Pell's relentless commentary fold. The last 20 years closed the way a person closes a book they've finally finished. Not because the story stopped mattering, but because it had at last been read all the way to the end.